Welcome to the Disability at ICA Podcast, a space where we talk with researchers in the field of disability, communication, and media from all over the world to learn more about their work, how they got there, and the ways forward. This is our second episode, and we'll have Kuansong Victor Zhuang as our guest. He works at the Hwee School of Communication and Information in Nanyang Technological University, and his research focuses on disability and inclusion in Singapore and Asia, digital inclusion, and disability in smart cities.
So, Victor, tell me more about yourself. How would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
So my name is Kuansong Victor Zhuang. That's Kuansong Victor, and my last name, my surname is Zhuang. I like to see myself as a disability scholar, in the sense that I say that now because my training is in disability studies. When I first started out with my bachelor's and master's, I was in history. So I focused a lot on the history of disability in Singapore. And I spent a couple of years, actually close to a decade, like 8 years at SG Enable, which is the National Agency for Disability in Singapore, working on policy, planning, org structure, org development, org culture. In between, I spent a year in Leeds doing a master's in disability studies with Colin Barnes. And then I went to do my PhD later on with Leonard Davis. So I tend to see my training in disability studies. But because I'm hired in media and comms now, I have to say I'm a communication scholar. So nowadays I tell people that, well, my training is in disability, but I'm a comms scholar. I guess more targeted at a question, right? And perhaps this is a segue into introducing why I'm doing the work I'm doing, is that I came across disability work initially when I first started doing the history of disability activism in Singapore. I think when I first did my bachelor's, I was trying to write an oral history of disability, and I tell this story a couple of times, maybe in slight variations. But the main gist of it is that because it's oral history, you have to go and interview your oral history subjects. And I think in that initial stage, I initially saw disability as an object of study, right? So I work with disabled people, disabled activists, and I, interviewed them, and they became my interviewees. One of them was Ron Chandran Dudley. I used to call him Uncle Ron. And Uncle Ron was actually the first chairperson of Disabled People's International. So DPI, that DPI, right, was actually formed in Singapore in 1981. People like Ed Roberts, Rick Finkelstein, Ben Lindquist, the first UN Special Rapporteur, and a bunch of other people from Asia Pacific as well, global, Africa. They all came to Singapore in 1981. They founded DPI, right? An organization of disabled people, the first international organization of disabled people, and elected a Singaporean as the first chairperson. And Uncle Ron became like a grandfather to me, actually. I think he regaled me with all these stories of disability activism. I mean, it came to a point where I would often go to his place. I go to his place like once a fortnight or so, and then we will open a bottle of whiskey and we have this clean glasses and have whiskey, and he would tell me all these stories. It came to this point where I could tell his stories for him, like all these stories of disabled people's activism, like the ones that he was involved with, in Singapore, but also internationally. And I think that was how I got introduced to this broader disability rights, disability activism. I think it got me really started on doing it. And I think that shifted how I thought about disability, right? And how I saw disability in the research I did.
Mm-hmm.
When he passed away in 2015, I decided it was time to do a PhD, actually. And that was really how I've been talking about it to him for very long. In fact, one of the things he wanted me to do, he thought was fun to do, was to think about pain and impairment and how pain is subjective and that what that means for disability. And I was like, yeah, you should do this. I was like, maybe, maybe not, you know. Yeah, but I mean, when he passed, I decided it was time to do it. And then I think at the same time was also a way of thinking about what disability means, not just in broader society, but in my life as well, right? And I think it's a broader area of reflection as well when I started doing disability work, but also reflecting on my interactions with him.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, that's nice. So your interest into disability studies started to grow when you were in bachelor studies, as you said, and that's in Singapore, right?
Yep, that's right.
And you were basically interested in seeing the historical aspect of disability within Singapore. So when was it when you finally thought that it's time to start presenting your research abroad and joining the International Academia of Critical Disability Studies?
Uh, I think it's fascinating for me to think about my role in the global. And I think I'll answer this question in a roundabout manner. And to say that, I mean, as I started working in industry, right, in the disability sector, but also when I went to Leeds, um, I guess the notion was that, well, there's always things to learn from, quote unquote, the outside world, right? I was going to say the West, but I think the outside, the global is always a good reference point in that sense, because oftentimes the global links to the West. And I think initially the idea was that, well, Singapore needs to learn from others. I think increasingly, I'm also, I mean, so back to the point about Singapore learning from the others, right? I think that was also the reason why I decided, well, it would be great to do a PhD, a master's first in disability studies with the Colin Barnes, the social model of disability. But social model of disability is so influential, right? So who else to learn other than the Colin Barnes, right? So these was a good place. I think I was in the last batch before Colin Barnes retired. And so being able to hear from him what the social model means to him, right? So I think changes my mind about a lot of things, especially about how we articulate the social model. And then being able to do a PhD with Lenny as well, right? One of the most distinguished figures in American disability studies. And I guess from that perspective, being able to go to the UK, being able to go to the States, and later on Australia as well, right? Seeing this quote unquote global locations and how disabilities articulated, one might say that how we see disability should be seen as like these countries, these places which do disability studies should be seen as reference, right? They are the standards that we need to aspire to. This is how we should do disability work. And I think initially that's how I saw it. But I think over the last, 5, 6 years, as I started doing work with Lenny, but as I finished my PhD just before COVID, I think 2019, I started in 2017. So from the midway point, started reflecting upon where Singapore lies in this broader, global disability studies. And I think it also applies for other locations as well, right? Where do we see Singapore? Where do we see our locations vis-a-vis this broader dominance, I would say, right, of British, American, but even Australian disability studies, right? How do we localize, contextualize, theorize about disability within such dominant frames? And I think that's something important that I'm increasingly grappling with. One of the work that I'm doing now, and that's really based off my PhD work. So my PhD work was an examination of inclusion in Singapore, in contemporary inclusion in Singapore. And I think fundamentally, the question that I asked in that piece of work, which I submitted as a book manuscript and is hopefully going through review now, fingers crossed, is how do we understand disability inclusion in Singapore and how can we theorize disability inclusion in Singapore vis-a-vis the global? And I say this because Singapore, of course, we know this, right? Singapore was, and I said this earlier, Singapore was where the International Disability Rights Movement was founded in 1981, right? So that's one intersection with disability rights. Singapore has, of course, signed and ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So that's another moment of intersection with the disability rights movement. But in Singapore, even though there has been a broader embrace of disability inclusion, beginning at least from the mid-2000s or even earlier, depending on where you trace that trajectory from, the state has actively disavowed the passing of any disability rights legislation, right? But it has actively embraced inclusion. So how do you grapple with that? How do you theorize about that, right? So the question I'm asking is this: can inclusion happen without rights? I mean, it's a fascinating question because the global is so much about rights, right? Scope Convention is about rights, but because Singapore has that intersections with all these broader movements, but yet it's moved in a different trajectory. So I think that's the question I'm trying to grapple with.
Wonderful. Yeah, I had a conversation with Professor Beth Holler about the same sort of thing, like where Beth was talking about how during hard time in early 1990s or 1980s, when Beth started working on critical disability studies, how universities used to demotivate her in a way from starting critical disability studies, and how this creates a sort of challenge for young scholars, those who are interested in studying critical disability studies. So since you have studied disability within Singapore, did you face any sort of obstacles from your institution as you proposed something related to disability studies, any research or anything? Did your institution in any way discourage you from doing that?
So I don't think so, but I think the problem is slightly different in that sense. And I say this because of my longer industry connections in Singapore, right? So SG Enable is the national agency for disability, and I used to, so they set up a sort of inclusive community space. So whenever I leave from that space, I take a cab, or I tell people I work in that place, or even now, actually, so connecting to academia today, when I tell people I work on disability, I work with disability, right? The response that I get all the time, in fact, 80% of the time in Singapore is that, wow, Victor, you have a good heart. You're working on disability. So at that point of time, like when people tell me that, I'm always thinking, well, how do you know I have a good heart, right? Simply because I work on disability? That's a bit weird, right? Why do you associate working with disability immediately with benevolence, with charity? Why not the politics, wither the politics of disability? Where is that? Where did that go, right? Because we know this, right? In disability activism, in academia, we know this. Disability is always about the politics, right? So why is it that in Singapore, people don't see it that way? And I think that also applies to the work I do. A lot of times people misunderstand the work I do as being, well, oh yeah, Victor's doing the research that helps disabled people. I'm like, yeah, sure. So I think I think the challenges today in Singapore are slightly different. It's a problematic challenge, right? Because people misrecognize disability. But I think that also gives people the space, or me the space, to say, well, we need to do this.
Yeah.
Right? And people wouldn't say no because they think it's good things. It's like benevolence. Right? We should do this because it helps certain people. And I'll go in and try to, divert or subvert the narrative, right? So that we focus on things that's important as encapsulated in the convention.
Definitely. That leads me
So
to
I think,
Yep.
yeah. So I think the challenge is very different today in a sense. Like I think Beth and others have paved the way for
Yep.
us, because now there's this established scholarship, this corpus of scholarship out there. So we could stand on their shoulders and say, well, look, people have done this and now it's our turn. And what do we do with it?
Yep. Definitely, you're right. Because Beth had a different sort of challenge, and now, like scholars like you have a different sort of challenge, and like people like
And
me who
you
are
as
very much
well.
new. Yeah, like I'm very new to the field. It's been only 2.5 years that I've started working on it. Like during my master's thesis, I became particularly interested in disability studies, and I'm a very fresh graduate from master's and started teaching in a university, and soon to start my PhD. I follow your work, Victor. Like I follow your work
Thank
very
you.
closely. I do follow work of Beth, so I sort of see the trajectory of the field and the evolution of the field and the way it's evolving with time. And it's so great to get the perspective from Beth and then from you, and to see the sort of journey of critical disability studies through different parts of the globe. Um, Here comes my next question, Victor. You already mentioned some, but what is the importance of critical disability studies? How would you, introduce the field to your students or to those who are thinking about researching into CDS?
So in Singapore, like I said, the challenge is slightly different. So a lot of times I challenge them by saying, well, you have to forget whatever you know about disability in that sense, because people have misconceptions, misperceptions about disability. Uh, I think in critical disability, I mean, the term that you use, critical disability studies and studies, of course, there's different variations depending on who is saying what. But in my opinion, disability scholarship should be about recognizing disability as a generative structure and as a generative form of knowledge and embodiment. How can we center disability to think differently about how we see things in society? I think that to me is and should be uh, the focus of disability work for me. Of course, people might have different focuses, right? And I think to do that, you should be able to use that and to move away from disability as simply an identity, which is very common in earlier forms of disability studies, but to use disability as an analytic, as a lens, which then ties in with some strands of critical disability studies, right? To use disability as an analytic, as a lens to think through the broader structures that quote unquote disability is embedded within. So I think that would be my sort of theoretical explanation to things. Uh, I would like people, students in my class, to live with an understanding of how disability is all around us, actually. That would be the lay understanding, right? That would be how I translate it and how we can um, recognize that when you use disability in that sense, right? When you see disability as generative, as being part and parcel of our everyday lives, then it's a possibility to rethink how we operate in society.
Wonderful. Wow. Wow. It's
That's
so.
the lay understanding, I think. Yeah, I mean to give a very lay example,
Hmm.
like in the first classes, in my first class, in every class that I teach, I take a very disability perspective in that sense to say that, look, the whole structure of assessment, the whole modality of teaching can be very ableist. And I tell them straight, if you need flexibility in your work, you can just tell me. I am happy as long as you take responsibility and tell me. I don't need to see documentation. You don't need a doctor to tell me you need accommodations to receive accommodations. You just have to tell me, Victor, I need accommodations. I need this. I wouldn't ask why you need this. Right? I'm happy to give it to you. And even then, most of the time, I will be able to tell them, look, the accommodations that you're asking for, I have already been doing in my class, right? So there are things I do in class that I think shock the students. Flexible deadlines, I'm always responsive. I do captions. I turn on my captions in my PowerPoints. Something so basic, and people don't do it in Singapore in teaching, right? So when they encounter that modality of teaching that's very centered around disability, immediately they see how they can do the same too. And I think that is fundamental in changing the way they see disability.
Wonderful, Victor. Wow, it's very theoretical, still very much practical, yet very poetic, the way you explain it.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Thank you very much. It's very dynamic as well. The way you teach your students and the way you are inspiring them, not only through the theoretical discussions, but through the style of your teaching.
Are you interested in the topic of disability, communication, and media? Join us for our third pre-conference at ICA 2026, Invisible to Indivisible. We'll be hosting a hybrid space, both in person in Cape Town and virtually on Zoom, on June 4th from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. South African Standard Time. This year's schedule includes presentations from early career researchers to keep you up to date with emerging topics in our field, a keynote address focusing on challenges in the African region, and 2 small group sessions led by senior scholars about making connections in academia and beyond for scholars with a purpose. You can check our website, icadisability.com, for more information. See you around!
So let's now talk a bit about the ICA Disability Communication and Media Working Group, which from its very inception, I know you are a very integral part of. So please tell us more about ICA Disability Working Group, Victor, and the emergence of it.
So the funny thing is, like I said initially, I'm never trained as a communication scholar. Right? I mean, Lenny is a professor of English, right? And I always thought initially I would either be hired in cultural studies or Asian studies. Seriously, like all the jobs I'm applying for is like I'm an Asian cultural studies scholar. Right? That was in 2021. And then when I met Jared was like, come, join me in media and comms. And, you know, you can be my postdoc for a year. And then later on, Wee hired me. So the School of Comms and Information hired me. So that's why I now have to say I'm a comms scholar. So I've never actually been to ICA during my graduate days as a PhD scholar. As a PhD candidate, I've always been going to like cultural studies, Asian studies, disability studies, never communications, never media, because I never saw myself as that. Now reflecting on it, like I can see how my PhD work actually fits into media and communications as well, especially the critical culture communication strand of communication studies. So to go back to that point, that question that you're asking me, right? I never saw myself as a comp scholar. The first time I went to ICA was because Jared asked me to and said that, well, let's put in a paper to ICA. I think that was Paris and that was online. He went and I didn't go because I'm like, yeah, I don't think I'll be hired. I'm not a comp scholar. Why should I go, right? But then after I got hired by Hwee, and Hwee is so big at ICA, I started going. So the first in-person ICA comms conference that I went to was actually Toronto. That year I was based in Princeton, so it was a short hop over, like an hour's flight to Toronto. And that was the first year we tried organizing. That was 2023. Yes, in Toronto.
And that's when you met Beth, maybe in Toronto.
Beth, we met Beth and everyone else.
Beth mentioned
Bill, Jonathan. Jared wasn't there because he got COVID. He can't go. Yeah, but that was the year we first sort of kick off everything. We had this Blue Skies session where we talk about where things are at ICA with disability work. And I think one of the things that struck from that Blue Skies session in Toronto was that a lot of early career scholars actually said that they want to come to ICA, but they found it hard to get into the main conference. Right? And I think it's sort of this, and of course, ICA is a tough conference to get in, but it's tougher when you don't have a community of people to work with, right? And so from that year on, we decided, well, let's try to work towards like a interest group, right? Let's try to see whether we can build an interest group, a community of scholars. And I think informally, I don't know whether we discussed this at Blue Skies, I think one of the idea was that, look, there are several ways to, like, there are two ways to say you want to set up an interest group at ICA. One is to say that, well, there's a established field of scholars, of scholarship in this area of communications and media studies, disability comms and media, which there is, right? And you can always make a case based on that. The other way is to do like 3 years of organizing of pre-conferences. And we said, well, why don't we do both? Since we already have the field, right? We have scholars, Beth, Jared, Katie, and so on and so forth, all pretty much established in the field, and there's like plenty of handbook. I mean, we can build on that and say, well, there's that, but let's build community as well, right? How do we do that? So we started organizing pre-conferences. So 24 was the first, then there's 25, Denver, and then this year, Cape Town is the third, which means that after 3 years, we are also able to apply again. So we put up a case saying, well, there's 3 years of pre-conference, and then there's this broader scholarship to work with. I think the other thing that we conscientiously decided to do was to actually try to organize in the main conference. So the pre-conference, of course, is easy, right? Because there's, as a group, as a community, the organizers of the pre-conference can decide who gets in and who doesn't get in, and we have more control, right? But we also wanted to make a case that, look, beyond the pre-conference, there is space for disability communications and media scholarship in the main conference itself. It's important enough that other divisions and IGs, interest groups, will take us. And so since Gold Coast actually, so Gold Coast, I think in Toronto, we just put in like 2 or 1 panel. I don't know, I forgot how many we do, but beginning from Gold Coast, then Denver, and then this year in Cape Town, we've been putting in like 7 or 8 panels every year, trying to put in 7 to 8 panels across the ICA main conference. And I think our success rate has been about 50%. So half of the panels get in, which is pretty decent actually compared to ICA's acceptance rates are terrible. Like it's like 1 out of 8 even for panels. So it's pretty decent to have like 4 out of 8, 50% of panels being accepted. And I think that also makes a case for the kind of work that we're doing. So I think very broadly, those are the work that we're doing at ICA in terms of organizing for disability media and comms. And for those of you listening who are interested, I think this year will be the year where we will put in an application.
Yep.
So if things go well, fingers crossed, I think by 2028, we will hopefully have an IG at ICA.
Wonderful.
Of course, the whole process is there's a lots of hurdles to jump through, but we'll try to see how we go with that.
Yeah. I think it's going great, and thanks for arranging one of the, those pre-conferences, because I got into IC and I got to meet all of you through one of those online pre-conferences in 2025, I think last year's pre-conference.
Last year, Denver.
Yeah,
yes, I remember.
I presented one of my papers. That's how I got to know all of you. And
was it on podcasting?
It was on podcasting. Yeah, it was on
yes.
auditory identity of disability through podcasting. I published the paper recently. So yeah, that was really amazing to meet all of you and see people working on the same field, and the sort of synergy that it created was amazing. And I'm truly enjoying the connection and the exchange with all of you, Victor. Thank you very much for doing this. And I'm sure whoever listening to us, our audience, if you are interested in critical disability studies or disability communication and media or anything in between, just do let us know and get in touch and attend our pre-conferences. And Victor,
can I just
sure.
Can I just say that the work that's being done here,
Yep.
there's a lot of others who are involved.
Yep.
as well. I mean, Shakil, you yourself, right, volunteered to do a series of podcasts. It's amazing, right? Valquiria has been organizing the social media. I have an undergraduate actually designing collections for us, Jordan. And then over at the pre-conference this year, when he has been sort of leading a team, Ria, Bimbo, Karen, Muya, a whole host of other people. I'm sorry,
Yep. Yep.
I'm
Yep.
having brain fog now. So if I don't name you, it's not because I've forgotten you. It's just that it's just this whole bunch, this whole group or community, right, that we're trying to build here. People getting involved. The senior scholars as well: Jared, Katie, Lorenzo, Bev, Amanda. Liz Elsasaw, Mary Alper. Or everyone just chipping in, supporting us, Katie Ellis supporting us with, energy, money, finances. I mean, the pre-con, right? Everyone's chipping in, saying that we'll put in a couple hundred here, a couple hundred there. That's how we are organizing it, right? Because if not,
Yep.
where's the money coming from? So it's amazing how everyone is really supporting this. So I want to highlight that this work here is being done by a community of scholars, every one of us, including you who might be listening, right? You are involved in this, actually. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Don't miss the Working Group on Disability, Communication and Media's event at ICA 2026 Main Conference. These are scheduled in South African time, which is GMT plus 2 hours. On Friday, June 5th, we'll have panels about visual culture and inequality in the African context, from 12 p.m. to 2:45 p.m. On Saturday, June 6th, starting at 10:30 a.m., we'll have a blue sky session about the future of disability communication and media research at ICA, and then a panel on health communication. Finally, on Sunday, June 7th, we'll be closing with a session on inequalities in the mediated disability activism at 1:30 p.m. Most of our sessions are hybrid, so you can join from wherever in the world you are. Just make sure you register to participate in the main conference at icahdq.org/event/ICA26.
Let's now talk about any reading that you are doing right now, Victor. What are you reading right now? Yeah.
More like, what am I writing? But I'm reading, actually. Where is it? I had a book somewhere. I'm actually reading Sunny Taylor's Disabled Ecologies. Surana Taylor, Disabled Ecologies, her new book.
Okay.
Actually, not so new, I think, probably 2 or 3 years old, on Tuscan. She's writing about a region in the States, Tuscan, I think. Don't quote me on this, but I have a poor memory. And she's writing about how disability in the land is connected to impairment. And they're all connected. So the ecology and the body, so coming out with this broader conceptualization, I think, of disabled ecologies and how they're all connected with the body and the impairment. And then it's a very, very powerful read, actually. And I look forward to finishing it, actually. So I'm reading that, actually. So it's more culture studies, disability work, but I think it's great work. I love Sunny Taylor's book, actually. Surana Taylor.
Yeah. Wonderful. So on this note, I was going to ask you, then I forgot. You mentioned about your PhD research topic, which was about the intuition of disability within Singapore. So what were your key findings from your research? Is the intuition of disability in Singapore any different from the sort of intuitions we get to see being represented in the critical disability studies books, predominantly from the global north? Yeah.
I think it's a more nuanced approach to thinking critically about disability in Singapore. And I think what I'm pushing at and gesturing at in that work, right, is for us to think critically, not just about how we see certain aspects of inclusion in Singapore, right? Of course, right, if you're critical, right, there's always things to say, right? You always find lack in Singapore if you take a broader disability lens, right? But also to say, well, look, if you take Singapore as the start point, then how can you use Singapore to reimagine
Mm.
disability and inclusion. So it's a more nuanced reading. I wouldn't say that they are sort of quote unquote findings in that sense. But I think what I'm gesturing at is this sort of how do we conceptualize and balance that reading with this broader disability theorizing. I think at the same time, I also wanted to say that I'm also doing other work around technology and digital inclusion and disability. So that's also something I'm working on as well,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
cutting across different aspects of, I think, emerging tech. But actually, a lot of it has been collaborating with Jared Goggin. We've been
Yep.
working on quite a number of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but also doing some work on my own about like emerging aspects of disability and technology in Singapore and Asia Pacific. Smart cities,
Mm-hmm.
you know, uh, super apps. Those
Mm-hmm.
are work I'm sort of thinking through because those are very, unique to the Singapore and also Asia Pacific case. And they
Uh-huh.
don't quite find that kind of articulations of emerging tech in other global city states.
Yep, definitely. And I think I read one of your articles on disability and society. It was about the electoral inclusion of, disability within Singapore. I found that article quite interesting, and I thought of writing a piece in light of, Bangladeshi experience and the Bangladeshi sort of, context. So that was a very interesting read. What are you writing currently, Victor? I mean, what are you currently invested in?
So just happens that the piece that you talk about, the one
Yep.
on electoral accessibility,
Yep.
that's a piece I wrote with Wenqi. So Wenqi was first author on that, Wenqi
Uh-huh.
Tan. And in fact, I'm writing something with her on YouTube and the Isterseals Film Festival, Disability Film Challenge, actually. I'm not sure if you know this. So there's a Isterseals Disability Film Challenge that comes about annually. I think it's now in its 13th or 14th year. And I think across the 13th, 14th year. So it's a global challenge, but it's mostly North American. So
Ah.
American submitting, right? Because it's
Yeah.
started by American, right?
Uh,
But it's been very fascinating because it's a disabled led and also a disability firm challenge in the sense that the entries need to center disability, whether have disability representation and so on and so forth. The founder talked about this and said that about one of the things that's sort of important in the firm challenge is that we get disabled people and disabled representation, disabled people as actors, right? And that's important. And across these 13 years, the hundreds and hundreds of entries every year, right? I think in the past couple of years, there's been like 100 so entries, 5 minute short challenge. Um, I think across these 13 years, there have been only two Southeast Asian entries
ah.
that was able to find, right? And so we're actually writing about these two Southeast Asian entries vis-a-vis a global challenge,
Yes.
right? And trying to understand how we situate that kind of work.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, like
So that's
getting
what I'm working on now, actually,
that sounds
right now.
quite interesting. Yeah, like getting the racial perspective or the cultural studies perspective on board. It's quite interesting. And
Mhm,
thank you so
mhm.
much for doing whatever you are doing, Victor. Would you like to pass any comment on any interesting research that you have encountered recently? Any research paper or anything?
Oh, that's tough.
I know
It's such a
there's a
tough.
lot, but anything that
This was.
remained with
But
you,
really,
yeah.
Sunny Taylor's book is, I think, great. Disabled Ecologies.
Yep, yep, yep.
I would love to have the time to sit down and read through it in one sitting.
Yep.
I just need to find that time. Regretfully, I haven't been able to. I haven't been able to find a large block enough time. Be getting like an hour here, an
Mhm.
hour and a half there. Just haven't been able to sit down throughout. So,
Yep, yep,
yeah, but
yep.
I think that is a fascinating book. I'm learning so much from it,
Wonderful.
actually.
Wonderful. Would you like to give shout out to any emerging scholar or activist through our podcast
There's so
episode?
many.
There's so
There's
many,
so
I
many. I
know.
mean, I'm so connected to the whole ICA and disability work at ICA that there's so
Yep.
many people out there. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think if you are listening to this, you are one of those. You're probably one of those that I work with,
Uh,
right? So, I mean, I really find fascinating that there's so much different work coming from different areas of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important for us to also think about what we can learn from each other in that sense, right? And not just always refer to, you know, the global north, right, as the standard to aspire to, which I think we are very cognizant of, right? Right, all the scholars within the working group and the steering core, we are all very cognizant of that, right? But I think as emerging scholars in this area, we should also be cognizant that we shouldn't see our work as being lacking, and we should see the work that we do as important in highlighting aspects of disability. And I would say that would be what I would offer a shout out for all our work.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Victor. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to our today's conversation? I think we are almost to an end of our episode, but anything that you feel should be added?
No, but really, thank you. Thank you for listening through this podcast. It's my first podcast, I think, maybe
Wow.
second, but really the first disability-centered one. So it's great to be able to just speak freely about things. Actually wondered if I would prepare, but I didn't. So I'm just talking about it. Yeah.
This was the second episode of the Disability at ICA podcast, brought to you by the Working Group on Disability, Communication and Media at ICA. You can find all the episodes of this show on our website, icadisability.com. My name is Valquiria Ramos Obregón, and I've been an assistant producer for this episode, alongside Hwee, Jace. Production, conduction, and edition was in charge of Shakil, Reja, Efti. The background music was downloaded from YouTube Studio and created by the Mini Vandals. We hope to see you in our in-person or virtual events. Have a nice day.